history doesn't whisper. It echoes louder, deeper, when you're standing on the edge of extinction. They say the world ends not with a bang, but with silence. It didn't feel like the end at first. It never does. The sky was clear that night, stars sparkling over cities teeming with life, traffic buzzing, laughter echoing off glass towers. People kissed their loved ones goodnight, thinking tomorrow would come like it always had. Predictable, comfortable, human. But the stars changed. At 2:11 a.m. UTC, something shifted. It started with auroras that didn't belong. Streaks of blue and violet fire tearing across the sky above the equator, dancing like spirits over places auroras were never meant to reach. Sao Paulo, Cairo, New Delhi. People looked up and gasped. Phones were raised. Social feeds exploded. Once-in-a-lifetime solar storm, they said. But there was no storm. And then the satellites went quiet. All of them. GPS stopped. Communications jammed. Planes dropped off radar. Power grids flickered, as if the Earth itself had taken a sharp breath in. That's when people started screaming. It came from orbit first, shards of light streaking across the night, like comets tearing through reality itself. But they didn't burn up. They slowed. They hovered. 10,000 ships, perfectly still, obsidian black, sharp as blades, arranged across the globe in patterns too precise, too intentional, to be anything but coordinated. And then, silence. Not a word, not a signal, not a demand, just a presence, watching. We didn't know what to call them at first. Governments scrambled, military protocols activated, news anchors fumbled over words like invasion and unidentified. But no one really understood. Not until the cutting began. Beijing vanished at 2:27 a.m. A light, cold, white, emotionless, descended over the skyline and erased it. Not bombed, not incinerated, just removed, like a blade through silk. Paris followed, then Lagos, then Chicago. Within 6 hours, 15 of the world's largest cities were gone. And still, they said nothing. We gave them a name because we had to. The Sorrow. Not because of what they looked like. No one had seen them up close yet. But because of the feeling they left behind. That crushing, unnameable despair. The sense that something ancient and merciless had decided we were done. But this isn't a story about the end. This is a story about what refused to end. Beneath the ashes, in the quiet left behind, something very human stirred. The first resistance wasn't a military strike. It wasn't a speech from a president or a secret weapon deployed from a bunker. It was a janitor in what used to be the Shanghai Metro. His name was Lu Qin. He had a busted comms unit, 2 weeks' worth of canned food, and a sun he hadn't seen since the sky cracked open. When the first Sorrow landform began deploying through the smog, 8-legged, tower tall, black as oil and humming with unnatural energy, Lu didn't run. He wired up an old maintenance drone with leftover plasma charges from a derailed mag train. He guided it on foot through miles of tunnel, dragging cables, avoiding patrols. And when that drone blew, it punched a hole through the invincible armor of the Sorrow construct. It bled, and that changed everything. Because up until that moment, we thought they were invincible, untouchable, gods. But Lu, this man with no weapon, no training, no rank, he proved they could bleed. That footage never hit the news, but it spread, fast, quiet, like wildfire among survivors. Someone patched it through to an old emergency satellite network. Then came the whispers. They're not perfect. They can be hurt. We can fight. And just like that, hope came roaring back into the world like a kicked-in door. The days that followed were chaos. Some governments tried to regroup, but most were already ashes. Military bases were targets. Protocols failed. But the people, God, the people, started moving. They called it the Ember Protocol. No one knows who started it. Maybe it was just a phrase someone spray-painted on a bunker wall. But it spread like myth. It meant this. If the world was burning, we wouldn't go quietly. We'd be the fire. All over the world, scattered pockets of humanity turned their homes into fortresses. Farmers turned tractors into armored rigs. Hackers took control of old weather satellites to blind Sorrow patrols. Children rewired drones to carry explosives. The very tools of civilization, abandoned factories, commuter trains, mining equipment, became weapons of survival. And slowly, ever so slowly, we started pushing back. But the Sorrow didn't care. They didn't retaliate the way we expected. They didn't punish or negotiate. They simply continued, methodical, surgical, as if cleansing a pestilence. They never made contact. never responded to our messages, never took prisoners. We weren't at war with an empire. We were being erased by something that didn't even see us as alive. And still, we fought, because that's what we do. In the ruins of Geneva, a woman named Amira watched her wife get vaporized by a Sorrow aerial strike. Amira had been a teacher, quiet, gentle, the kind who baked cookies for students and cried at animal rescue ads. She picked up a shattered recon drone, welded it to a targeting AI salvaged from a decommissioned tank, and became one of the most effective anti-Sorrow snipers in the northern wastes. Her first kill? She climbed 30 stories of rubble with a shattered ankle, waited in a frozen storm for 19 hours, and shot a Sorrow watcher out of the sky with a coil gun duct taped to a rusted elevator shaft. Her last words before the shot? For the ones they didn't finish. The bullet tore through something we still don't understand, some kind of neural conduit, glowing like starlight. The watcher convulsed, then collapsed. 100 kilometers away, 2 other Sorrow units short-circuited simultaneously. Turns out, they were linked, and that changed everything again. The more we fought, the more we learned. Not by studying, not by research labs or simulations, by dying, by surviving, by trying things no rational species should. They were fast, but not in narrow corridors. They were adaptive, but only when they noticed you. They were linked, but their minds could be broken, severed, by chaos they couldn't predict. And no one does chaos like us. So here we were, scattered, bloodied, outnumbered 1,000 to 1, but alive. And what the Sorrow didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was this. We don't die quietly. Not when we still have hands to raise. Not when we still have names to scream. Not when there's even a spark left in the ashes. We are not gods. We are not perfect. We are human. And when the fire came to end us, we learned to burn. We weren't made to survive. We were made to refuse extinction. It started in Sao Paulo. Not the Sao Paulo you remember, the one full of traffic, neon signs, rooftop gardens clinging to vertical towers. That city was already gone, reduced to skeletal ruins by the time the story you're about to hear unfolded. What was left was a scar. Skyscrapers cracked open like rotted teeth. Streets warped with heat and craters. The once glowing mosaic of human life now sat silent under skies that never truly went dark anymore, lit dimly by the eerie, ever-hovering glow of Sorrow patrol craft, always watching, always listening, like predators waiting for one last twitch from the corpse. But the city wasn't dead. Beneath the concrete bones, beneath collapsed highways and buried metros, a heartbeat still pulsed. A flame, not of fire or light, but of defiance. The man's name was Jairo Mendez. He was 37, a mechanical engineer, the kind who once designed hydraulic systems for agricultural satellites. He lived a normal life, weekends with family, afternoon football matches, barbecue on Sundays, the kind of life that didn't come with weapons or war. But war didn't ask for qualifications. It just arrived. Jairo had lost everything in the initial strikes: his wife, his daughter, their home, their neighborhood. He didn't talk about it much. Some wounds are too deep for words. But when the earth stopped shaking and the screaming faded, he did what every survivor eventually had to do. He stood up, and he began to build. You see, Jairo had taken refuge in an old water refinery, an underground system of pipes and purification tanks beneath the city. It wasn't much. The power was intermittent. The air stank of rust and mold. But it was hidden, and more importantly, it still worked. Jairo wasn't alone for long. Word traveled in the ruins quietly, like whispers passed between ghosts. Survivors began to trickle in. A nurse with half a mechit, a teenager who'd worked at a drone garage, a grandmother who knew how to grow food from mold cultures. 10 people, then 20, then over 100. The place was nicknamed Baía do Silencio, the Bay of Silence, a pocket of breath beneath the weight of collapse. But Jairo wasn't content with survival. He couldn't just breathe, not after what the Sorrow had done, not after what they took. He wanted them to feel it. It began as an idea. The Sorrow deployed a terraformer on the outskirts of the city, a massive, beetle-like structure, its legs embedding deep into the earth, pumping chemicals, rewriting the air molecule by molecule, turning soil into ash, preparing the planet for their kind. That was their strategy. They didn't fight for control. They fought for erasure. But something about this terraformer was different. It was slow, vulnerable during its calibration cycle, and more importantly, it hovered over a dried-up riverbed lined with forgotten infrastructure, pipes, tanks, pressure valves, things Jairo understood. He and a small team worked in silence for days. They mapped pressure points, salvaged explosive compounds from broken fusion batteries, rewired old agricultural drones into mobile detonators. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't elegant. It was human, messy, improvised, brilliant. They launched the attack at dawn, not because of tactics. Dawn offered no advantage, but because Hyro wanted light. He wanted them to see what humans could do. The drone approached low, flying blind, just under the electromagnetic haze of the terraformer. When it reached the designated point, just beneath the machine's central core, it didn't explode. Not yet. Hyro triggered the refinery's ancient pumps remotely. Compressed hydrogen, stored for decades, forgotten by the city, surged through the pipes like veins waking from a coma. And when the drone finally ignited, the explosion wasn't just heat. It was history. The terraformer rose off the ground, folding and twisting in on itself like an insect caught in a magnifying glass. Its chassis glowed white, then blue, then black, as the pressure wave tore across the district. For a brief moment, Sao Paulo had a sunrise again, and the world saw it. We don't know how the footage survived. Some say it was a satellite relay that hadn't fully failed. Others think it was an old orbital weather balloon, still drifting and recording on autopilot. Whatever the source, 32 seconds of footage made it to the last remnants of the internet. A fireball swallowing a Sorrow machine, a cheer from underground, and the unmistakable, bone-deep scream of something dying that didn't believe it could. The video went viral, not in the old way, not through likes or shares. That world was dead. This was viral in the way fire spreads in a dry forest. It reached Antarctica, the remnants of the UN core. It reached a Martian science outpost thought to be lost. It reached a battalion in orbit who had been considering surrender, and it gave them a reason not to. They called it the first flame, not because it was the first attack, but because it was the first victory. See, the Ember Protocol wasn't official. It wasn't a policy handed down by leaders. It wasn't written in any book. It was a feeling and understanding born in the hearts of people who had nothing left but rage. It meant, if we are to burn, let us burn loud enough that they remember us forever. What followed wasn't orderly. It wasn't pretty. There were no battle lines, no command chains, just fire teams forming in ruins, guerrilla strikes, weapons made from scrapyard ghosts. In Cairo, a pianist turned the broken hull of a crashed alien drone into a sound weapon that shattered Sorrow sensors with vibrational harmonics. In Vancouver, a mother of three built an EMP cannon from a hydroelectric dam. In what was left of Mumbai, an old street gang rewired delivery bots into mine-laying swarms. They didn't wait for permission. They fought because they couldn't not. Because something deep in our DNA, older than language, older than fire, told us that extinction should be earned, not accepted. And the Sorrow? They didn't understand. They had faced resistance before. They had ended civilizations, crushed empires, erased planets that refused to comply. But they had never encountered us. Not like this. Not the way we burn when cornered. They expected submission. They received sabotage. They expected fear. They were met with fury. And somewhere in the cold stillness of space, where the Sorrow command nodes calculated probabilities and watched our world unravel, something in their models began to shift. They started deploying faster, adapted patrol formations, initiated hive-level decision trees earlier than scheduled. Because the math stopped working. Humanity wasn't behaving. Back in Sao Paulo, Hyro stood on the edge of the crater his explosion had carved. He was burned, bruised, one hand shattered, but he stood, alive, breathing, looking at the carcass of a machine that thought it was immortal. And he didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just whispered something into the smoke-filled wind. One down. They took our skies. We made the ground fight back. You have to understand what it felt like to look up and realize the sky didn't belong to us anymore. We'd spent centuries conquering it. The Wright brothers, orbit, Mars, exoplanets. We believed the heavens were ours by right. But the Sorrow? They didn't just invade from above. They claimed it. Their ships didn't fly. They hung silent and unmoving, as if space itself bent to hold them, always watching, always waiting. We couldn't get a single object past low orbit without it being fried, frozen, or worse, dissected mid-air by Sorrow interceptors that moved faster than light had a right to. The sky became a prison, a grave, and so we went down, deep. That's where this chapter of the story begins, not in a shining city or a noble military command center, but in the cold, cracked bones of the Earth itself. The Andes, the Siberian tunnels, the old Martian training vaults, buried beneath Olympus Mons. Places built for miners, or preppers, or research stations that no one ever thought would matter again. They became home, not comfortable, not warm, but alive, and more importantly, hidden. In those dark places, humanity didn't curl up and wait to die. We changed. They called them the ghost companies. No ranks, no insignias, no uniforms, just faces painted in mud and ash, eyes lit by bioluminescent tattoos, and armor cobbled from riot gear and pressure suits. You couldn't track them, couldn't predict them, and if you saw them, you were already dead. These were the ones who refused to accept gravity as a limit, who turned their backs on the open sky and said, "Fine, you can have it. We'll take everything else." They trained in silence, slept in shifts, ate freeze-dried protein, and drank water filtered through corpses. But their minds sharp, focused, devoted to one thing, making the ground fight back. Their weapons weren't standard. They didn't have access to clean supply chains or advanced military R&D. What they did have were old mining drills, gravity regulators from fusion turbines, and the desperate genius that only comes when you've buried too many friends to care about safety. Gravitic disruptor suits, prototype exoskeletons made from scavenged parts, became their signature. Not for strength, not for armor, for movement. The suits bent gravity just enough to let them move through tunnels at terrifying speed, to drop down vertical shafts in silence, to leap across craters without making a sound. They became myths. To civilians, they were protectors. To the sorrow, they were anomalies. To each other, they were family, the only one they had left. The defining moment of the ghost companies, the story that turned them from whispers into legends, took place at a place no map shows anymore. Krakatoa Rift. What's left of it? Once, it was just a name. An old volcano in the Sunda Strait. Beautiful, wild, a warning from Earth that she could still bite. But after the climate shifts, after the quakes, after the orbital strikes, Krakatoa became something else. A chasm, a yawning scar in the crust, miles wide and bottomless. The Sorrow tried to anchor one of their planet breakers there, a kind of spike that drills into the core and begins rewriting physics. Not fast, but permanent. We knew if they finished it, Earth wouldn't just die. She'd forget she ever existed. The ghosts couldn't allow that. They didn't wait for orders. They didn't have the luxury. 5 teams, 23 people. They dove into the rift without backup, without a way out. They weren't carrying explosives. They were the explosives. Each one had a gravitic core rigged to overload, enough to create a localized collapse in the Sorrow Spike substructure. But the catch? They had to reach the heart, a mile down, past heat, radiation, Sorrow guards. None of them expected to return. We don't have footage of what happened next. Not really, just fragments, broken sensor readings, a few scattered helmet feeds, flickering images of red tunnels, pulsing alien metal, screams choked by static. But we know what mattered. The spike didn't finish. Something ruptured deep in the earth. A shock wave shot up through the crust, tearing the Sorrow's anchor out of alignment. The planet breaker folded in on itself, like a telescope slammed shut by a giant hand. And when the dust settled, the mountain stood. All 5 teams were gone. No bodies recovered. No final messages. Just silence. But in that silence, we heard everything. They became more than soldiers, more than names on a wall. They became a promise that humanity would never stop fighting, that we would haunt the places the Sorrow believed too dark for life, that we would move like shadows beneath their feet, listening, watching, striking. We called them ghosts of gravity, and they became our edge. After Krakatoa, ghost company tactics spread. In South Africa, they derailed an orbital elevator by tunneling beneath its foundation and detonating synchronized concussions. In Norway, they collapsed an entire mountain on top of a Sorrow Terra colony using sound-triggered quakes. In Tokyo, they reactivated an abandoned maglev line and turned it into a mobile launch platform, firing projectiles straight into orbit. They were everywhere and nowhere. And for the first time in the war, the Sorrow flinched. Not because we were winning. We weren't. Not yet. But because we were becoming something they couldn't model, couldn't predict, couldn't understand. The Sorrow were fast, adaptive, and terrifying. But we were chaotic. We took pain and made it into poetry. We took loss and made it into weapons. We took gravity, something meant to keep us down, and used it as cover, as strategy, as a reminder that if the sky was lost, we'd make the Earth itself a weapon. There's a quote etched on the side of a fallen ghost helmet. now preserved in a bunker museum outside what used to be Mexico City. It reads, "Let them have the heavens. We'll haunt their every step on the ground." That was humanity's message, not one of surrender, one of persistence, of rage born deep in the dirt, rising upward with every breath. And somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the bombs and fire and steel, the sorrow began to hear that message. We're still here. We're still fighting. And we'll never stop. Not even when the sky falls. Not even when the ground crumbles. Because where gravity pulls, humanity climbs. We sang with metal, and our enemies bled the tune. By now, Earth was no longer a planet. It was a battlefield. Every continent bore scars, jagged burns, silent cities, forests turned to glass. You could trace the war across the land like veins across a dying body. And through it all, the sorrow floated above, calm, cold, and terrifyingly precise. They didn't need armies in the way we understood them. Their machines fought for them. Drones with minds, constructs with spines of plasma and limbs that shimmered like glass in motion. It was war by mathematics, brutal, efficient, unrelenting. And still, humanity endured. But we were running out of places to hide. The underground sanctuaries were filling. The ghost companies were stretched thin. Food was rationed. Ammo was prayer. What we needed wasn't just another strike team or sabotage run. We needed something louder. They say music was the first language. Before words, before fire, just rhythm, sound, vibration. We were always meant to make noise. And in our darkest hour, we did. Not with voices, but with steel. The choir didn't start in a lab. It didn't rise out of a government facility with blinking lights and white coats. It began in a scrapyard outside what used to be Nairobi. There was a man there. His name was Ezra Koine, a mechanic, nothing special. But if you gave him a wrench and something broken, he could make it breathe again. Ezra had been a Martian rig engineer once, back before the fall. Back when cargo haulers still crawled across the red dunes and humanity looked toward the stars with wonder, not fear. When the war came, Ezra didn't pick up a gun. He picked up a blueprint. He gathered the broken, mining walkers, farming exosuits, the half-rusted frames of decommissioned Martian survey mechs. He welded, bolted, whispered to machines like they were old friends. Others joined him. A teenager who used to race combat drones, a surgeon with experience in neural feedback loops, a grandmother who'd once designed urban prosthetics. And what they built wasn't a mech. It was a message. The first unit was ugly, patchworked, parts scavenged from 15 different eras of human engineering. Its limbs were uneven. Its plating was scorched. Its targeting system glitched every time someone sneezed too loud. But it worked. When the Sorrow dropped a recon construct into the Nairobi wastes, something twice the size of a school bus, slithering on liquid legs and pulsing with energy, the mech stood in its path and opened fire. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't fast. But it refused to fall. And when it finally drove a plasma lance straight through the Sorrow unit's core and let out a hydraulic roar that echoed for kilometers, the world heard it. Ezra named the machine Samara, Swahili for protected by God. It wasn't a weapon. It was a hymn, and others followed. From the glassed remains of Detroit, engineers rose from the ruins and built Loki, a heavy assault mech with a reactor core stitched together from subway power stations. In the salt mines of Kazakhstan, Yaroslava came online, its frame covered in the names of every village lost to orbital strikes. In shattered Osaka, two brothers assembled Kuro, a nimble strike unit with twin rail guns carved from high-speed rail maglevs. No two were the same. Each was a personality, a voice, a rhythm. Together, they were called the Choir of Steel. Because when they moved, the earth shook. And when they fought, it was music. Pilots weren't chosen. They chose themselves. You couldn't be trained for this. There were no manuals, no drills. The interface wasn't neural. It was emotional, raw. Pilots had to sync, not through chips or wires, through pain, through purpose, through that deep, unrelenting burn in the gut that whispered, "I will not go quietly." The choir didn't just walk into battle. They marched, and wherever they went, humanity sang with them. Then came New Nairobi, a city of shadows, once a bastion of resistance, now occupied by sorrow constructs. Half of it burned, the other half patrolled. Civilians trapped, communications cut. The ghosts couldn't get in. Airstrikes were suicide. So Ezra and the choir walked in. 10 mechs, 10 human hearts strapped into 20-ton instruments of war. And what happened next became legend. The choir entered the city at dusk, not sneaking, marching. Samara led, its footsteps like thunderclaps. Kuro danced between the ruins, silent and deadly. Loki moved like an avalanche, railguns pulsing in perfect cadence. No formation, no doctrine, just instinct and rage. The Sorrow responded immediately. They sent 10 constructs, then 30, then an entire vanguard, hover tanks, stalkers, winged things that shrieked through the sky like broken glass scraping across metal. And the city became a stage. What people remember most isn't the weapons, it's the sound. Because the choir was loud, pistons slammed like drums, railguns screamed, plasma hissed through cracked vents. Speakers blared old Earth songs, classical symphonies, rock anthems, lullabies recorded on scratch drives. One mech played a recording of a little girl laughing on repeat. Its pilot's daughter, lost in the first strikes. To the Sorrow, it was noise. To us, it was sacred. The battle raged for 9 hours. Buildings fell, roads cracked, mechs spurned, but the Sorrow bled. They bled. Samara tore open a construct with bare hydraulic hands, ripped its power core out, and hurled it into the sky. Loki absorbed 7 hits to protect a group of trapped civilians, then self-detonated to take out a landing pod. Kuro leapt onto the back of a flying Sorrow hybrid and rode it into the river before disintegrating in a burst of light. Only 3 mechs made it out, but the city stood, and the people lived. After that day, the choir wasn't just a unit, it was a movement. Pilots lined up to sink. Blacksmiths forged new parts. Tribes from the savannah brought molten ore as offerings. Survivors tattooed mech silhouettes on their backs. Children built statues from scrap and left them at the feet of broken machines, whispering thank yous to metal gods that fought for them. The choir didn't ask for worship, but they earned it. Ezra Koine never built another mech. He said one voice was enough. He spent the rest of the war training others, teaching them not how to build weapons, but how to build hope, how to turn rust into redemption. And when he died, years later, they buried him inside the cockpit of Samara, now a rusted monument overlooking the city it saved. There's a plaque there, just one line. When the world went silent, we made it sing. The Sorrow didn't understand it. How could they? They fought with logic, with precision, with silence. But we roared, because we were the underdogs, the fractured, the burning, the loud. And in the end, what echoed across the war-scorched earth wasn't just steel or flame. It was the sound of a species that refused to die quietly. It was the choir of steel. We buried our dead in orbit, so the stars would never forget their names. There's a silence that comes after fire. Not peace, not relief, just stillness. The kind that settles in the bones. The kind you feel in your chest like something heavy that won't move. You learn to live with it. You walk through the ruins, you breathe the ash, and you carry names you'll never say out loud again. That's what Earth had become, a planet made of ghosts. The victories were real. We told ourselves that. The choir of steel held New Nairobi. The ghost companies kept the planet breakers from taking Krakatoa. Sao Paulo lit the first flame and proved the Sorrow could bleed. But every win came with a cost. A weight. For every mech that stood, 3 fell. For every tunnel ghost that returned, 5 didn't. Entire towns vanished in the middle of the night. Whole populations just gone. The stars, once filled with dreams and satellites, were now haunted. They glowed red with reflected fire. The worst came with Refuge 9. It wasn't a base. It wasn't a stronghold. Just a convoy, 24 carriers stitched together from old cargo ships, orbital rigs, and converted commercial liners. It was humanity's last neutral zone. No weapons. No engines fast enough to fight or flee. Just families, civilians, survivors. They were headed for the outer rim. One last desperate hope to find somewhere untouched. Somewhere to breathe without running. Somewhere to remember the old world. They never made it. No one knows exactly what gave them away. Some say it was a radiation spike from a faulty fusion core. Others say it was betrayal. Someone on board sent a ping, hoping to trade safety for survival. Whatever it was, the Sorrow found them, and they didn't even hesitate. They didn't demand surrender. They didn't broadcast a message. They didn't send drones to scan or assess. They just unleashed fire. 10,000 lives. Gone. No warning. No mercy. The largest single loss of civilian life in the war. Gone in less than 12 seconds. It broke us. Not the soldiers. Not the fighters. We were already past breaking. It broke the soul of the species. There were no news broadcasts anymore, but words still found a way. Shortwave radio, hacked comms, whispered in underground bunkers and burnt-out shelters. Refuge 9 is gone. That sentence became a wound. A funeral dirge carried across continents. For a moment, just a moment, you could feel the war pause. Like even the chaos held its breath. And in that stillness, something inside us changed. We stopped trying to survive. We swore. It started in the Arctic, a scattered network of military holdouts, scientists, scavengers. They called themselves the Last Accord, a name born from irony. They weren't allies before. They barely spoke the same language. But when the news of Refuge 9 reached them, they did something humanity hadn't done in years. They signed a pact. Blood, not ink. They cut their palms, stood around a burning map, and said the words that would echo through every bunker, ship, and stronghold left on Earth. No surrender, no retreat, no silence. That's when the Blood Accord was born. It wasn't about governance. There was no president, no council, no flags waving in dust. It was a promise that if we were going down, we were taking them with us, that the dead wouldn't be forgotten, that the silence of the stars would echo with the names of those we'd lost, that the sorrow would learn what it meant to be remembered. Across the globe, the accord spread. On Luna, engineers woke up old war satellites and wired them to self-destruct if approached. In Jakarta, a single mother turned a floodgate into a heat trap that melted 3 sorrow harvesters. In Brazil, an entire slum worked together to carve a sorrow warning beacon from a fallen tower. So they'd know. We are still here. The oath wasn't just spoken, it was lived. And the dead? We made sure they were seen. There were no more proper burials. No cemeteries with trimmed grass and carved stones. But we still remembered. We carved names into steel plates and welded them to the hulls of resistance ships. We wrote them on walls, on ammo crates, on the backs of helmets. And in orbit, we did something different. We gathered the remains of fallen pilots, soldiers, and civilians, ashes, fragments, whatever we could find, and launched them in capsules made from scorched escape pods. Tiny stars drifting in low Earth orbit, each one a name, each one a witness. They floated above us, silent and eternal, a constellation of resistance. We called it the Sky Cemetery, and even the sorrow couldn't touch it. Admiral Cale Renner, once a disgraced officer, stood beneath that sky at what was left of Earth's last naval yard. He wasn't young anymore. Half his body was cybernetic. His face bore the burn marks of orbital flame. But his voice still had gravity. He looked up at those drifting lights and said, "The dead are watching. Let's make it worth their time." From that moment on, there was no more waiting, no more hiding. The Blood Accord wasn't a resistance movement anymore. It was a species-wide oath, a rage deeper than strategy, a grief sharper than any weapon, a defiance born from the ashes of every street, every village, every mother holding a picture of a child they'd never see again. We weren't fighting for land. We were fighting for memory. The sorrow noticed. They didn't retreat. That wasn't their way. But their tactics changed. Faster deployments, heavier units, patterns that suggested, not confusion exactly, but calculation. They were beginning to adjust. We were no longer irrelevant. We were a problem. And that, in itself, was victory. But victory never came without cost. There's an image, grainy, taken from a drone barely held together with duct tape and spit. It shows a child, maybe 6 years old, standing in the middle of a ruin, smoke behind her, a teddy bear in one hand, the other raised in a salute to a passing mech. Her name was Layla. She died 2 days later when the sorrow returned. But that image, it lived on, painted on walls, projected during battles, tattooed on the arms of soldiers. She became the face of the Blood Accord, not because she fought, but because she remembered. Ashes and oaths, that's what we had left. And it was enough, because when your cities are gone, you fight for names. When your leaders are dust, you fight for memories. When your people are burned into the sky, you fight so the stars never forget them. We were no longer trying to win. We were trying to make sure we were never erased, because we understood something the sorrow never could. You can kill a body, you can burn a world, but you can't silence a story. And humanity? We are made of stories. We went back to the moon, not to dream, but to bury a knife in the throat of silence. The moon was the first place we ever looked up to and thought we could reach that. It was hope, mystery, triumph, a silver coin in the dark we once held in our hands. Then the war came, and we let it go. The sorrow didn't destroy the moon. They didn't need to. They just emptied it. They took the old colonies, the lunar vaults, the science domes, the interstellar comm towers, and hollowed them out. Every sensor showed it. Oxygen scrubbers still active, power cores humming, but no human life, no movement, just silence. People stopped asking why. Because when you've lost Earth's cities, when children sleep in bunkers beside spent shells and family photos, you don't waste grief on old footprints in the dust. We called it the Hollow Moon, a monument to a dream we no longer had time for. But then something happened, a pulse. It came through the dust, low frequency, nearly missed by every dish we had left. A hum, repeating every 37 seconds. Not natural, not random. It came from deep beneath Mare Serenitatis. And that hum was ours. The signal was traced to a forgotten installation, Lunar Relay 6, buried so far beneath the regolith it had survived every orbital sweep. It was supposed to be a backup comms node for Martian trade ships. Obsolete, abandoned, but it was broadcasting, repeating one line in broken old Earth standard. We are still here. They sent a team, small, silent, suicidal, 6 souls in a repurposed mining transport, retrofitted with radiation shielding and gravitic dampeners scavenged from an old drop pod. Their call sign was simple: Midnight Choir, not for poetry, for function. They would land at lunar midnight, hidden in shadow, and pray the sorrow didn't notice. The crew wasn't elite. They weren't soldiers, just survivors. There was Ashervale, once a deep-core miner, hands like iron, bones held together with steel rods. The battle was fierce. Explosions lit the void like dying stars. Lasers cut through darkness with ruthless precision. Ships shattered into clouds of debris. But the crew of the Sanctuary fought with a determination born of desperation. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for all of us. Jara stood on the bridge, her hands steady on the controls, her voice calm, yet fierce. Hold the line. Light the way. As the energy core powered up, a brilliant glow began to fill the ship. It was warmth in the cold vastness of space. It was life in the shadow of death. The core activated. A pulse of light radiated outward. It pierced the Sorrow's networks, disrupted their communications, shattered their formations. The beacon was more than a weapon. It was a call to arms. Across Earth, Mars, and the scattered sanctuaries, resistance fighters felt it. A surge of hope. A reminder that the fight was not over. The Sorrow faltered. Their control slipped, and humanity pressed forward. In the aftermath, the cost was heavy. The sanctuary was damaged beyond repair. Many lives lost, but the light remained. Jera's last transmission echoed through the stars. For those who fell, for those who rise, we are the last light, and we will burn forever. The war was far from over, but the story had changed. The darkness was no longer absolute, because humanity had become a flame that could not be extinguished. We are the last light, and as long as we burn, hope will never die.